The girl they called Broken. In a far corner of the galaxy, on a cold blue planet called Virelia, there lived a young alien girl named Lyra. Her skin shimmered faint silver under the twin suns, and one of her eyes glowed faintly blue, while the other stayed dim to the people of her village. She was a reminder of failure, of imperfection, of something that should have never been born. They called her Broken, whispered behind her back, and turned away whenever she passed. No one ever smiled at her. No one ever held her hand. No one ever asked if she was all right. Lyra lived alone in a small clay hut at the edge of the colony. Near the forest of crystal trees, she worked hard every day, carrying water, collecting food, cleaning the village paths, just to earn a little grain. But still, people threw words sharper than blades. Children pointed at her glowing eye and laughed. Look, the cursed one walks again. She kept her head low, her heart heavy, her hope dying a little each day at night. Lyra would sit by the small window looking at the stars, wondering what kind of worlds lay beyond. She imagined places where people did not judge by looks, where being different was not a sin. She often whispered to herself, "If there is a God among the stars, please, let me belong somewhere." But the stars never answered, only the cold wind did, carrying her tears into the dark sky. One night, when the twin moons of Virelia turned red, a great roar shook the skies. Lyra looked up and saw fire tearing through the clouds. A ship, a massive metallic vessel, falling fast. The sky glowed orange, the earth trembled, and moments later, a thunderous crash echoed across the valley. The villagers screamed and ran, shouting that the gods were angry again. But Lyra stood frozen, her heart pounding not with fear, but with something she hadn't felt in years: curiosity. She grabbed a small lantern and ran toward the glowing horizon. Smoke rose from the wreckage like dark serpents reaching for the stars. As she approached, she heard a faint cry. A voice, not alien, not Virelian, but something strange and deep. Through the broken metal, she saw a man, tall, bleeding. Trapped under heavy debris, his skin was pale, his uniform torn, and his breath weak. He was a human. Lyra had heard stories of humans, creatures from the blue world called Earth. They were said to be powerful, emotional, dangerous, and kind all at once. But she had never seen one with her own eyes. She stepped closer, her lantern light trembling against the cold metal. The man's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, their gazes met, one filled with pain, the other with fear and wonder. "Please, help," he whispered weakly, his voice rough like gravel. Lyra hesitated. She had never helped anyone before, not even herself. But something deep inside her heart told her to move. She dropped the lantern, gripped the metal beam with her bare hands, and pulled with all her strength. Her skin burned, her arms shook. But she didn't stop. With a scream of effort, she managed to free his leg, then, step by step, she dragged him out of the wreckage and away from the fire. When they finally reached a safe spot under the trees, she fell to her knees, exhausted. The human looked at her glowing blue eye and smiled weakly. "You saved me," he said. No one had ever said those words to her before. No one had ever thanked her for anything. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She looked away, whispering softly, "You would have done the same." The human's name was Captain Elias. He was part of an exploration crew sent to chart the edges of the galaxy. But something had gone wrong. Their ship had been attacked by unknown raiders, forcing him to crash land on Virelia. He had lost his team, his ship, and his hope. Until Lyra found him. That night, Lyra took him to her small hut. She cleaned his wounds with water from the stream and wrapped them in cloth. Elias watched her silently, his tired eyes studying her every move. When she turned, he said softly, "Why do they call you Broken?" She froze, her hand shaking. "Because I am," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You saved a man you've never met from a world you've never known. That's not broken, that's brave." Her heart stopped for a moment. No one had ever called her brave before. She sat in silence as the human drifted to sleep. Outside, the wind howled across the valley. But for the first time, Lyra didn't feel alone. She looked at his sleeping face, then at her glowing eye reflected in the lantern glass. And for the first time in her life, she didn't hate her reflection. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of hope flickered. A small voice whispered, "Maybe I'm not broken after all." As the night went on, the stars above Virelia shone brighter than ever. Two souls, one human, one alien, lay under the same roof, unaware that their meeting would change the course of two worlds forever. and while the wind carried the ashes of the crash through the silent forest, Lyra finally smiled, a real smile, fragile, pure, and filled with the first light of belonging. The human who saw her. The morning came slowly over Virelia, painting the sky with silver clouds and soft blue light. Lyra woke before dawn, listening to the quiet breathing of the human who slept in her small hut. For a moment she just watched him, wondering if she had dreamed it all. A human, a real human, lying in her home, trusting her, alive because of her hands. It felt unreal, like one of those star legends the elders used to tell before they turned cruel. She quietly stepped outside, the ground cold under her bare feet. The air smelled of smoke from the crash, but also of morning dew. She walked to the stream, filled her pot, and looked at her reflection. Her glowing eye shimmered like liquid light in the water. She touched it gently and whispered, "Why did he call me brave?" Behind her, a voice answered softly, "Because you are." She turned quickly. It was Elias, awake now, leaning weakly against the doorframe. His bandaged arm hung at his side, his uniform scorched, but his eyes still bright with warmth. Lyra's first instinct was to bow her head, to hide her face as she always did, but he smiled. The kind of smile that wasn't pity, wasn't mockery, just human. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I just wanted to see the person who saved my life." Lyra didn't know how to respond. No one ever spoke to her gently, not even her family. She looked down, murmuring, "You should rest." "Captain," he chuckled quietly, "if I rest any longer, I'll grow roots." The small joke made her lips twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. Elias noticed it and felt a strange ache in his chest. He had seen kindness, war, even death, but never someone so broken and strong at the same time. For the next few days, Lyra cared for him in silence. She brought food, fixed his wounds, and watched him repair a strange metal device from his ship. He told her it was a communicator, a machine to reach his world. Lyra listened, fascinated, her bright eye reflecting every flicker of blue light. Elias explained stories about Earth, cities that reached the sky, oceans that glowed at night, and people who painted their dreams into color. Each word painted a picture she could never imagine. She asked shyly, "On your world, do they laugh at those who look different?" He looked up and said quietly, "Sometimes they do, but the good ones don't." That night, Lyra sat beside the lantern, thinking about that answer. No one had ever told her that cruelty wasn't natural, that kindness could exist by choice. She thought maybe the human world was not just far away, but better. Outside, the wind whispered through the glowing trees, carrying distant voices from the village. They were talking about her. They always did. She heard her name mixed with words like cursed and traitor, because she had sheltered a human. They said she had doomed them all. Elias saw her trembling and stepped closer. He put a hand gently on her shoulder. "Hey, what's wrong?" Tears shimmered in her eye as she said, "They think I'm cursed for helping you." He sighed deeply, his gaze firm. "Then let me be cursed with you." Lyra blinked, confused. "Why would you do that?" He smiled faintly. "Because where I come from, we don't leave our saviors alone." The words broke something inside her. Not her heart, but the walls she had built around it. For the first time she laughed, quietly. Like a bird learning its song again, Elias smiled back, realizing that the sound of her laughter felt more healing than any medicine. That night they shared stories under the starlight. Lyra told him about her mother, who had once sung lullabies about the stars. She told him how when her strange eye began to glow, her mother stopped singing. "She said it reminded her of sorrow," Lyra whispered. "So I stopped looking at her," Elias said softly. "Maybe she was afraid, not of you, but of what she didn't understand." His voice carried no judgment, only compassion. Lyra had never known what compassion felt like until now. It was heavier than anger, lighter than pity, and warmer than the sun's. She didn't know what to call it, but it made her chest hurt in a way that wasn't pain. Days passed and Elias grew stronger. He started walking outside, teaching Lyra about his world, the meaning of colors, of handshakes, of smiles. He showed her how humans used words like thank you and sorry, and how each one could change hearts. Lyra practiced whispering, "Thank you," with awkward pauses. He grinned. "See? You sound more human every day." She laughed again, shaking her head. "No, I sound more alive," but peace never lasted long on Virelia. Rumors spread fast, and anger grew quicker than light. One evening, as Lyra and Elias sat near the forest edge, they saw torches flickering in the distance. The villagers were marching toward them, shouting her name. Lyra froze, fear gripping her like ice. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice breaking. Elias stood, gripping his sidearm, though it barely worked. "Then we'll face them together." He looked at her and said calmly, "I've faced armies before, but I've never seen courage like yours." She shook her head. "I'm not brave." He met her gaze and said, "You ran into fire for a stranger, that's more bravery than any soldier I've known." She wanted to argue, but his words wrapped around her heart like a shield. The shouts grew louder, the light brighter. Lyra took a deep breath, knowing her life was about to change again. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. As the first torchlight reached the forest clearing, Elias whispered one last thing. "Let them come, Lyra. Maybe tonight. They'll finally see what I see." She turned toward him, her glowing eye reflecting the flames, and for a heartbeat, even in fear, she felt something she had never felt before. Pride. The storm of hate. The night was heavy with anger, the air thick with the smell of burning oil and fear. Lyra stood frozen beside the human, her trembling hands clutching the edge of her cloak. Across the dark field, the villagers came like a wave of fire, hundreds of glowing torches rising against the night. Their voices were sharp, cruel, echoing through the forest. "Bring out the broken one. Bring out the human." The sound made her chest tighten. Her breathing short and shallow. All her life she had faced whispers, but tonight the whispers had turned into a storm. Elias stepped forward, his figure calm even as shadows danced across his face. He knew hatred when he saw it. It looked the same on every planet. In every species he raised his hands and called out, "We mean no harm." But his words drowned in the roar of the crowd. Someone threw a rock. It struck the ground near Lyra's feet, scattering dust. Another voice shouted, "She brought a curse upon us. The fire from the sky was her doing." The mob shouted in agreement, their fear turning into violence. Lyra wanted to run, to hide, but Elias placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Don't let them take away who you are." She nodded weakly. Though her body trembled, Elias stepped forward again, his voice firm. "You call her cursed, yet she saved my life when all of you ran." His words cut through the noise like a blade, but instead of silence, the crowd erupted louder. They did not want truth, they wanted someone to blame. Hatred was easier than understanding. One of the elders stepped ahead, a tall figure with silver skin and cold eyes. He pointed at Lyra. "She has no place among us. Her glowing eye is a mark of evil. Her blood brings misfortune." Elias clenched his fists, his patience cracking. "On my world," he said, "we call people like her heroes," the elder sneered. "Then take your hero and leave before we burn you both." The villagers raised their torches higher, their faces twisted by light and fury. Lyra's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear anything else. Memories flashed, every insult, every slap, every lonely night under a silent sky. She whispered to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't exist." Elias heard her words and turned sharply, his voice like thunder. "Don't say that again." She looked up, startled by his tone. "You are the only reason I'm alive," he said. "And if they can't see that, then they are the broken ones." "Not you," something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from the weight of his belief. No one had ever stood beside her like that. No one had ever spoken for her when the world turned away. Her glowing eyes shimmered brighter, reflecting the fire around them. The villagers gasped, some in awe, others in fear. Elias stepped protectively in front of her, shouting, "Enough," but the mob didn't stop. A stone hit his arm. Another grazed Lyra's shoulder. She cried out, clutching the wound. Elias turned to her, whispering, "We have to go. Now." He grabbed her hand and ran toward the forest. The crowd chased them, shouting, "Stop them! Don't let them escape." The path ahead was dark, the roots twisted like serpents under their feet, but Lyra's glowing eye illuminated the way, a blue trail cutting through the blackness. Behind them, the shouts grew fainter, replaced by the pounding of rain. Lightning flashed across the sky, splitting the storm into light and shadow. Elias held her hand tightly, refusing to let go. They reached a cliffside where the forest opened into a valley of glowing crystal trees. The storm broke loose, rain drumming on the leaves, washing away blood and dust. They stopped under a fallen log, panting, soaked. Lyra looked at him through the rain. They'll never stop. They'll hunt us forever. Elias leaned back against the rock, his breathing rough. Then we'll keep moving. She shook her head. You don't belong here, Captain. You should have left me. He turned to her, eyes fierce even in exhaustion. And let the only soul who saved me die alone? Never. Lyra blinked back tears, unable to understand how a stranger from another world could care more than her own people. Thunder rolled across the sky. The storm was wild, but in its chaos, Lyra felt something shift inside her. For years she had believed that her glowing eye was a curse, but tonight it had saved them from the darkness. She looked at her reflection in a puddle, a girl half lit by blue fire, half drowned in rain, and for a fleeting moment, she saw what Elias saw. Light, not shame, she whispered. Maybe I'm not the storm they fear, maybe I'm the light that comes after. Elias smiled faintly. Now you're starting to sound like a human. They built a small fire under the rocks. Elias used the last working piece of his communicator to send a weak signal into the sky. Lyra watched the blinking red light, asking softly, Will your people come for you? He nodded slowly. If the signal reaches them, yes. She looked at the fire and whispered, And what about me? Elias turned to her, his expression gentle. Where I go, you go. The storm raged on, but inside their small shelter, the fire glowed warm. Lyra leaned closer to it, her face illuminated by soft orange light. For the first time, she didn't feel like running. The world outside could scream, curse, or burn, but inside this fragile moment, she felt safe. Elias watched her silently, realizing that somewhere in the chaos of the galaxy, he had found something rare, not just survival, but meaning. Outside, the rain washed away the footprints leading to their shelter. The villagers' torches faded into the distance, and as lightning struck the horizon, Lyra whispered to herself, The storm can't last forever. Elias nodded beside her, staring into the fire. No storm ever does, between thunder and silence. Between fear and hope, two hearts from different worlds waited, not knowing that this night, the night of hate, would become the beginning of something far greater than either of them could imagine. The forest of light. The storm faded with the coming dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean. Drops of rain clung to every leaf. Turning the forest into a sea of diamonds, Lyra opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the soft morning light that filtered through the crystal branches. She had not meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had pulled her under. Beside her, Elias sat awake, guarding the small campfire that now burned low and steady. For a moment, she simply watched him, wondering how someone so far from home could still look so calm. When he noticed her gaze, he smiled faintly. Morning. Star-Eye, he said. Lyra tilted her head, puzzled. Star-Eye? He pointed at her glowing blue eye, still shimmering in the half-light. It looks like a star that got trapped and never wanted to leave. She turned away shyly, hiding a smile she didn't mean to show. No one had ever given her a name that sounded kind, not broken, not cursed, just Star-Eye. They ate quietly, a few dried fruits and some roots Lyra had gathered. When Elias stood, he winced, his side still aching from the crash. Lyra moved quickly to help, but he waved her off gently. I'm fine. He looked around the forest, awed by the glowing trees that stretched endlessly in every direction. Your world is beautiful, he said, even after all that hate. Lyra's gaze fell. Beauty here doesn't save anyone, Elias replied softly. Then maybe you'll be the first one it saves. They began to walk deeper into the forest. The ground sparkled faintly under their feet, lit by small glowing roots beneath the soil. Each step they took seemed to wake the earth. Soft blue light spreading outward like ripples in water. Lyra whispered, This place is called the Forest of Light. Her voice was gentle, full of old memories. My mother once said the forest listens to pain. It glows brighter when hearts begin to heal. Elias looked around, the trees shimmering brighter as they passed. Then it must love you already, he said, half smiling. Lyra laughed quietly, her voice echoing between the branches. Or maybe it just pities me. He shook his head. No, light doesn't pity. It only reflects what's true. They found shelter near a large crystal trunk split open like a cave. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly sweet. Elias set down his damaged communicator, the blinking light still weak but alive. If I can fix the antenna, he said, my crew might pick up the signal. Lyra sat beside him, curious. her glowing eye catching the reflection of every spark from his tools. "Will they come for you soon?" she asked. "Maybe," he answered. "But if they do, they'll come for you too." She frowned softly. "I don't belong among humans." He met her gaze and said, "You belong where someone sees you." The words sank into her like sunlight into frozen ground. She looked away, trying not to show the tears forming in her bright eye. For hours, they worked together, her collecting leaves and herbs for food, him repairing circuits and wiring. As the sun set again, the forest began to glow brighter. Billions of tiny insects took flight. Glowing like stars between the trees, Elias stood watching, whispering, "It's like the night sky fell to the ground." Lyra smiled softly. The forest always shines more when it feels hope. That night, they built a small fire outside their shelter. Lyra traced shapes on the ground with a stick, forming strange glowing symbols. Elias leaned forward, curious. "What do those mean?" She hesitated, then said, "Dreams that will never come true." He looked at her for a long moment and said, "Then you've been drawing lies." She blinked in surprise. "What?" He smiled gently. "Dreams don't die, they just wait for someone brave enough to make them real." Her hand froze mid-air, the blue glow flickering between her fingers. For a moment, the air felt different, lighter, warmer, alive. As the night deepened, a strange sound echoed through the trees. Low, distant, like thunder, Lyra tensed. "Hunters," she whispered. Elias reached for his weapon, though it was barely working. She shook her head. "Not people, machines. They roam the outer woods collecting energy." They extinguished the fire quickly, crouching behind the crystal trunk, through the shimmering branches. They saw metallic creatures gliding between the trees, silver shapes with red eyes scanning the ground. Lyra held her breath, her glowing eye dimming as she tried to hide the light. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and sure. The machines passed, humming low like predators that had missed their prey. Only when silence returned did she exhale, trembling. Elias whispered, "You're safe now." She nodded, whispering back, "Not for long. Nothing stays safe here." When the danger passed, the forest seemed to breathe again. The trees pulsed with soft light as if welcoming them back. Elias looked around and said quietly, "You know, Lyra, on Earth we have forests too. But they don't glow and only hearts do." She tilted her head. "Hearts glow?" He smiled, tapping his chest. "When you protect someone, when you love. When you forgive, and they glow right here." Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Her hand slowly rising to her own chest, she whispered, "Then maybe mine is learning." The fireflies danced around them, weaving tiny trails of light for the first time. Lyra leaned closer to him, not from fear but from comfort. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore, it was full of meaning. The human and the outcast sat beneath alien stars, two souls stitched together by understanding. Above them the twin moons crossed paths, casting a silvery halo over the forest. Lyra watched their reflection in his eyes and thought, "He doesn't see what I lack, and he sees what I am." Before sleep took her, Elias spoke softly. "When my people find us, they'll ask how I survived." Lyra turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "What will you tell them?" He smiled, his gaze steady. "That I met someone who taught me what light really means." The forest glowed brighter, as if the world itself had heard his words. And that night, for the first time since she was born, Lyra didn't dream of running. She dreamed of walking, forward toward the stars, beside someone who saw her not as broken but as beautiful. The secret of her eye. The night in the forest of light was quiet, but beneath the silence, something was changing. The air felt heavier, charged with a strange energy that neither Lyra nor Elias could understand. The small communicator blinked weakly, sending its fragile signal into the void of stars. Elias sat beside it, hoping it would reach someone, anyone. Lyra watched from the entrance of their crystal shelter, her blue eye glowing softly in the dark. She had grown used to the human's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his voice. He had become a piece of her world now. Something her lonely heart had never imagined it could have, but lately, she felt something stirring inside her, a power she couldn't explain. Sometimes when she felt strong emotions, the air around her shimmered, the light in her eye burned brighter, and last night when she dreamed, the whole forest had pulsed with blue light as if answering her heartbeat. She didn't tell Elias, not yet. She was afraid that this strange light, the thing that had cursed her since birth, might also destroy her only friend. But fate doesn't wait for fear to fade. It always arrives when the heart is unprepared. That evening, Elias stood outside the shelter, his eyes scanning the sky. He thought he saw movement. Dark shapes gliding above the treetops. Ships, he whispered, too small to be human. Lyra's blood ran cold. Hunters, she said, her voice trembling. They feed on life energy. They come when they sense strong power. Elias turned toward her, realization dawning. Your eye, she nodded slowly, tears welling up. They can feel it, they always could. Before he could reply, the forest exploded in a burst of red light. Metallic creatures descended from the sky, long black limbs, glowing red cores, and voices like grinding metal. They moved fast, cutting through the trees with laser precision. Elias grabbed his weapon, shouting, "Run!" Lyra. But she didn't move. She could hear their voices in her mind, cold. Mechanical whispers calling her the source. Elias fired. Bolts of blue energy flashing through the mist. One of the hunters fell, hissing. Another leapt forward, claws striking. He fought like a soldier born for war, but there were too many. Lyra screamed as one of the machines hit him. Throwing him against the rocks, he hit the ground hard, gasping in pain. Blood staining his uniform, time froze. Lyra's heart shattered in her chest. She ran to him, falling to her knees, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered. "Not you too." His hand rose weakly, brushing her cheek. Lyra. "Run," but she shook her head violently, tears falling onto his skin. "No, not this time." The world went silent. Her glowing eye began to burn brighter than ever before. The forest lights dimmed as if holding their breath. A deep hum filled the air, and suddenly a wave of energy burst outward. A brilliant blue light erupted from her body, shaking the ground. The hunters froze mid-attack, their red eyes flickering. Then one by one they shattered into dust, their screams echoing through the trees. The forest fell into silence again. The light fading slowly, Elias opened his eyes weakly, staring at the glowing figure in front of him. Lyra stood surrounded by floating blue particles, her eyes still blazing like a star. Her hands glowed faintly, her tears sparkling like liquid light. What did you do?" he whispered. Lyra looked down, her voice trembling. "I don't know." She fell to her knees beside him, exhausted, the glow around her fading to a faint shimmer. Elias forced himself to sit up, ignoring the pain. He cupped her face in his hands, his voice full of awe. "You saved me again." Lyra shook her head. "I didn't mean to." He smiled faintly. "Maybe destiny did." She looked at him, fear and wonder mixing in her gaze. "My whole life," she said softly, "they told me this eye was a curse, that it brought death." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "It doesn't bring death, Lyra, it brings light." The communicator beside them flickered suddenly, the signal flashing stronger than before. The energy surge from Lyra's power had boosted the transmission. Elias stared at it in disbelief. "It's working." She smiled faintly, her energy fading. Then maybe. It was meant to happen. They sat in silence as the forest slowly came alive again. Small creatures peeked from their hiding places. The glowing trees pulsed gently as if whispering thanks. Lyra leaned her head against Elias's shoulder, her body weak but her heart strangely calm. He looked down at her and said quietly, "You were never broken, Lyra. You were just waiting for the right reason to shine." She closed her eyes, whispering, "You make it sound like I'm something good." Elias smiled, his voice a whisper against her hair. "You are." The wind carried away the last ashes of the destroyed hunters, scattering them across the glowing forest. For the first time, Virelia's night sky looked peaceful. No hate, no noise. Just the steady glow of a single blue light that refused to fade. And under that light, two souls, one human, one alien, sat side by side, one who thought himself lost, and one who finally learned she was found. As the stars shimmered above them, the communicator beeped once more. A faint human voice broke through the static. "This is the Odyssey. We've received your signal. Respond." Elias's eyes widened. He looked at Lyra, then at the glowing sky. "Looks like someone heard us," he said softly. Lyra smiled weakly. Maybe someone was always listening. The light in her eye dimmed, no longer a mark of shame, but a symbol of rebirth. And for the first time in her life, Lyra didn't hide her face from the world. She lifted her chin toward the stars, letting her glow shine freely, unbroken, unstoppable, and beautiful beyond anything her people had ever imagined. The return to the village. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight touched the forest of light. The storm had passed, the hunters were gone, and silence finally returned to Virelia. But for Lyra, everything felt different. The same trees that once hid her now seemed to bow gently as she walked. Every leaf shimmered faintly blue, echoing the energy that still pulsed within her. Elias walked beside her, his uniform torn, his eyes tired but full of quiet pride. In the distance, smoke still rose from the village she once called home. He looked at her and said softly, "You don't have to go back." Lyra stopped, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes, I do." Her voice trembled, not with fear this time, but with strength. "All my life they saw me as a curse. Maybe today they'll see the truth." Elias nodded slowly. "Then I'll walk with you." She turned to him with a small smile. "Even after everything?" He grinned faintly. "You think I'd miss the part where you changed the world?" She laughed softly, the sound light and free. Together they began the long walk back toward the village. The morning light followed them. Bright and golden, birds returned to the trees, singing as if welcoming her home. When they reached the edge of the settlement, the villagers gathered in silence. No one shouted this time, no one threw stones. The same people who had called her broken now stood frozen in disbelief. They had seen the flashes of blue light during the night, the destruction of the hunters, the storm of power that had saved them all. Elders stood at the front, their faces pale. Unsure whether to kneel or run, Lyra stepped forward slowly, her glowing eyes soft but steady. The crowd parted without a word. Elias followed close behind, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The eldest of the council finally spoke, his voice shaking. You survived." Lyra's voice was calm. "No, I lived." The elder swallowed. "The machines on the hunters, they vanished before reaching us." She nodded. "Because I stopped them." Gasps rippled through the crowd, disbelief and awe mixing like storm and sky. Another elder spoke harshly. "You unleashed forbidden energy." Lyra met his gaze. "I used what you all feared to protect what you all love." Her words echoed across the square. No one dared to respond, not even the ones who had cursed her name. Elias stepped forward, his tone firm. "If she hadn't been here, none of you would be standing." The villagers looked down, ashamed. The same people who had called her a burden now saw her as their savior. Lyra looked at them, faces she had known all her life. Some wept silently. Others simply stared at the glow in her eye. She felt no anger now, no desire for revenge. She only felt the peace that comes when pain finally ends. "I don't want your worship," she said softly. "Just your understanding." The eldest elder bowed his head, his voice barely a whisper. "Forgive us." Lyra shook her head gently. "There is nothing to forgive. You feared what you didn't know." Her words carried through the wind, soft but strong. For the first time in years, the villagers looked at her not with disgust, but with respect. Children peeked from behind their parents. Wide-eyed and curious, one small girl stepped forward. Holding a broken flower, she looked up at Lyra shyly and said, "It glows like your eye." Lyra knelt down, taking the flower gently. "Everything glows when it's touched by kindness." The girl smiled, and for the first time laughter filled the square again. Elias watched from behind, his chest tightening with quiet pride as the day went on. Lyra walked through the streets she once avoided. She passed the well where she had once been pushed aside. She passed the shop that had refused her food. Now every eye followed her with gratitude. People placed hands over their hearts, a silent gesture of respect. She didn't need their words, the silence said enough. Near the edge of the village, she stopped and turned to Elias. "You could go home now," she said softly. "Your people must be close." He looked at the sky where faint lights blinked far above. "Maybe," he replied. "But home isn't always a place," she smiled faintly. "Then what is it?" He answered, "It's the person who makes the world feel less empty." Lyra looked away, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't name. Later, as evening fell, a familiar voice crackled through the communicator at Elias's belt. "This is the Odyssey rescue team. We're approaching Virelia, signal locked." Elias took a deep breath. Looking up at the glowing clouds, he turned to Lyra. "They're coming for us." Lyra nodded, her expression calm. "Then it's time you went back to your world." He hesitated. "And what about you?" She smiled softly. "I finally have mine." The villagers gathered again to see them off. The same field that had once been filled with anger now shimmered under the soft blue light of peace. A gentle wind blew through the crystal trees as the human ship descended. Its lights bathed the ground in silver, reflecting off Lyra's glowing eye. Elias turned to her, his voice low. "You changed me, Lyra. You changed what I thought humanity meant." She shook her head gently. "You showed me what beauty really is." He stepped closer. Taking her hand, "Promise me," he said. "Don't ever hide your light again." Lyra smiled, tears glimmering like stars. "I promise." The wind lifted her hair, carrying her voice across the valley. As the ship's ramp lowered, Elias took one last look at her, standing tall, glowing bright, unafraid. He saluted her the way humans saluted their heroes. She placed her hand over her heart, returning the gesture in her own way. The engines roared, dust swirling around them, and as the human rose into the sky, Lyra whispered to herself, "The broken girl is gone." She looked up at the stars, her blue light shining against the heavens, and in her place stands someone whole. True beauty, the human ship rose through the blue clouds of Virelia. Leaving behind trails of silver fire, Lyra stood on the edge of the valley, the wind tugging gently at her hair, her glowing eye reflecting the light of departure. The villagers stood behind her in silence, not as judges or strangers anymore, but as witnesses. They watched the sky together, a human leaving, an outcast reborn, and a world forever changed. For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply watched until the ship became a small star among stars, and then she whispered softly, "Goodbye, Elias." The forest seemed to answer her with a quiet hum, the trees glowing faintly brighter as if to comfort her. She smiled, tears forming in her bright eye. Not of sorrow, but of peace. He had given her something she never thought she would have, a reason to love herself. Days passed and Virelia slowly began to heal. The people rebuilt the homes damaged by storms and hunters. They began to plant again, to sing again, to greet one another with warmth instead of fear. And in the center of it all stood Lyra, the girl they once called broken. Now they called her Lightkeeper. Children ran to her laughing, asking her to tell them stories of the human who came from the stars. She told them gently. He came to remind us what it means to see beauty in others. But even as her world found peace, her heart carried a quiet ache every night. She walked to the same hill where she had watched him leave. The twin moons hung low, their light bathing her in silver and blue. Sometimes, she imagined his voice carried on the wind. "Beauty isn't in perfection, it's in courage." She smiled each time she heard it, whispering back, "Then I am brave enough." The years went by slowly, and Lyra became something more than a legend. She used her power to heal, to grow crops, to restore the forests. Her glowing eye, once seen as a curse, became a sacred sign of life. The people of Virelia built a crystal monument in her honor, shaped like an open hand, a symbol of unity between worlds, but Lyra never sought fame or worship. She said only one thing to the villagers. "If you must remember me, remember the human who saw beauty where others saw brokenness." Far beyond Virelia, Elias stood on the bridge of his ship, the Odyssey. He watched the same stars that she now watched from her world. His hand rested over his heart, where a small crystal hung, a piece of the forest of light Lyra had given him before he left. He wore it every day, a reminder that courage was not forged in war but in kindness. His crew sometimes asked him about the light that reflected from it. He would smile and say, "It's a story about a girl who taught me what humanity really means." One evening, years later, his ship received a strange signal. It was faint, pulsing softly, not mechanical, but living. Elias leaned forward, heart pounding. That frequency, I know it. The sound was the same blue hum that once filled the forest of light. He smiled quietly, whispering, "So you're still watching, Lyra." He set the ship's course to record the signal, to keep it forever. It became known across his crew as the heartbeat of Virelia. Back on the planet, Lyra sat by the edge of the glowing forest, her reflection dancing in the water. She no longer feared the glow within her. She cherished it. She whispered softly to the night, "The human who came from the stars taught me that true beauty is not in how we look, but in how we love." Her words floated into the breeze, carried upward toward the distant sky somewhere far away. A human captain smiled at the same stars and felt the same peace. Generations later, parents told their children the story of the girl with the shining eye and the human who saw her light. They said their meeting ended an age of fear and began an age of understanding. No longer did people hide what made them different. They celebrated it. The forests of Virelia grew brighter every year, glowing softly at night like the galaxy had descended to the ground. And in every corner of the world, when someone felt lost or unwanted, they would whisper her name, Lyra the Unbroken, at the top of the same hill where she had once said goodbye. A statue now stood. It showed Lyra and Elias standing side by side, one hand reaching toward the stars, the other toward the light of the world. At the base of the statue were carved the human's final words. True beauty is not seen with the eyes, but with the heart that dares to understand. As the twin moons crossed once more in the sky, the statue shimmered faintly. For a moment a soft blue glow surrounded it, and those who saw it swore they heard two voices in the wind. One human, calm and warm, whispering, "You were never broken," and another, gentle and bright, answering, "And you were never alone." The wind carried those voices across mountains and seas, through crystal forests and shining valleys, and somewhere beyond the stars, perhaps in another life, the human and the alien girl walked side by side once more. No hatred, no fear, no walls between their worlds, and only light. Only peace, only understanding, for that was the truth they left behind. That beauty was never in perfection. It was always in compassion, and the galaxy remembered their names not as legend, but as proof that even across different worlds, a single act of kindness could change everything.